They told us these institutions were created to save countries. But what if I told you they were created to control them? For decades, we were taught that poverty exists because nations are weak, corrupt, or uneducated. But the truth is far more disturbing. Many countries didn't fall on their own. They were pushed into loans they could never repay, pushed into policies that destroyed jobs, killed industries, and sold national wealth to foreign hands, pushed into poverty not by fate, but by design. Because behind every collapsed economy, every starving nation, and every modern revolution, there sits one silent empire, an empire without soldiers, without borders, just contracts, interest rates, and economic chains. And today, we are going to expose the secret global playbook they never wanted you to see. So tighten your seatbelt, because once you learn how the IMF and World Bank really rule the world, you will never see global power the same way again. In the shadows of history, there exists a name so quiet yet so powerful that even the richest bankers and mighty empires feared whispering it. They weren't kings, they weren't warriors, but they built an empire so vast, so influential, that entire nations bent before their wealth. This is the untold dark financial legacy of the Sassoon dynasty, also known as the Rothschilds of the East. But unlike the Rothschilds, their story was buried, not because it was forgotten, but because it was dangerous. Our story begins in Baghdad in the early 1800s. Back then, Baghdad wasn't just a city, it was a global trading hub. And among the most respected families were the Sassoons, wealthy Jewish merchants trusted by rulers and elites. David Sassoon, the son of the chief treasurer to the Ottoman governor, lived a life of privilege. But power attracts enemies. When political tides turned, the family faced persecution, and David Sassoon fled. He arrived in Bombay, today's Mumbai, with almost nothing except his knowledge of trade and an ambition sharper than steel. What happened next changed world history forever. Bombay in the 1830s was chaos: traders, sailors, British officers, smugglers, and dreamers scrambling for fortune. The British Empire was expanding, hungry for money and control. And David Sassoon saw an opportunity, one darker than anyone could imagine. He built warehouses, he built shipping fleets, he built trust with the British, and then he entered a trade that would shake the destiny of nations. Opium, yes. The Sassoon Empire did not rise from gold, but from drugs. Not ordinary drugs, but opium, the addictive poison that would destroy millions of lives in China. David Sassoon became the bridge between British India and China, smuggling opium at a scale the world had never seen. Ships loaded from Indian ports sailed into Canton, Shanghai, Hong Kong, carrying wealth for the Sassoons and misery for China. Families were ruined, cities were drowned in addiction, and while China begged Britain to stop the drug trade, the Sassoons only grew richer. When China resisted, the British responded with cannons. 2 opium wars were fought, cities burned, treaties were forced, and while empires fought, the Sassoons counted profits. By the mid-1800s, they controlled shipping fleets across Asia, massive textile factories in India, trading houses in Shanghai, Hong Kong, and London, and financial power that reached Parliament itself. They weren't kings, but empires obeyed their money. They weren't politicians, but governments worked for their interests. They weren't soldiers, but wars were fought for their business. A single family influencing the fate of nations, silently. But with great power came great enemies. Secret societies, rival banking families, and political elites questioned their rise. Rumors spread, from London clubs to Shanghai ports. How did this family grow so powerful so fast? Who protects them? What deals did they make behind closed doors? Stories emerged of hidden agreements, bribery, and intelligence networks. Some claimed they had connections with British intelligence. Some said they funded wars and rebellions to protect their trade routes. No one could prove anything. No one dared. Because the Sassoons weren't just wealthy, they were untouchable. By the late 1800s, the Sassoons moved to London, into the world of European high finance. They married into aristocratic families. They entered elite British circles. They funded parliament campaigns. They built palaces and banks, from refugees to global financial puppeteers. But their rise came at a price. History books talk about the Opium Wars. They talk about British imperialism. But they rarely talk about who profited the most. And that silence speaks louder than any evidence. Today, the Sassoon name barely appears in mainstream history. No school textbooks, no history documentaries, no political speeches. Why? Because this story isn't just about wealth. It's about how money can bend nations, destroy societies, and rewrite history. It's about how some dynasties built fortunes not from innovation or industry, but from addiction, destruction, and silence. And it forces us to ask, how many other powerful families are erased from history? Not because they failed, but because they succeeded too much. Some dynasties changed the world, others controlled it from the shadows. The Sassoons did both. And this is only the beginning of their story. When David Sassoon died in 1864, many believed the empire would weaken, but they were wrong, very wrong. Because the next generation of Sassoons had learned every trick of empire building, and they were ready to step out of the shadows. David Sassoon had laid the foundation. His sons would turn it into a global machine, powered by money, influence, and alliances with the most powerful empire on earth, Britain. This was not just a business dynasty anymore. It was becoming something far bigger, a financial empire blended into the bloodstream of the world. The year was 1872. In the heart of London, the world's banking capital, the Sassoons arrived not as immigrants but as royalty born of wealth. Palaces on the River Thames, private carriages, lavish charity balls attended by counts, lords, and even princes. But behind the glittering chandeliers and diamond jewelry was a darker mission, not just to join the British elite, but to become the elite. They didn't just seek acceptance, they demanded influence. And money speaks louder than lineage. With opium profits flowing like rivers of gold, the Sassoons began rewriting their identity. British education, aristocratic marriages, political funding. They didn't conquer nations with armies. They conquered society with wealth. Sir Albert Sassoon, son of David, became the face of the new empire. He expanded their trade, not just in opium, but in cotton, real estate, banking, shipping, and rail investments. He built chambers of commerce. He funded public projects. He mingled with kings and prime ministers. And soon, the British crown rewarded him with titles, with honors, with access. He became Sir Albert Sassoon, knighted by Queen Victoria herself. From refugees fleeing Baghdad to British aristocrats shaping the empire's economy. This wasn't just success. This was transformation. A dangerous transformation. But as they rose higher, whispers in London's elite circles grew louder. They control trade routes. They influence parliament. They know where the empire's money is buried. To some, the Sassoons were geniuses. To others, they were manipulators, operating above governments beyond borders. Their financial reach extended from Bombay to Shanghai, Hong Kong to London, and deep into European banking networks. Where there was profit, they had a key, and where there was silence, they had a lock. Meanwhile, in Asia, another member of the family rose, Sir Edward Elias Sassoon. He expanded their hold in Hong Kong and Shanghai, building opium warehouses so large they were known as the banks of poison. He didn't deny it, he didn't hide it, because in those days, power didn't need to explain itself. The Sassoons funded shipping companies. They funded British colonial administration. They supported intelligence networks. Some historians believe they even passed secrets between Asian territories and London. Were they merchants or the shadow financiers of empire? Truth has a price, and silence is often worth more than gold. But history never forgets forever. By the early 1900s, the world was changing, and one storm was brewing, a storm no amount of wealth could escape. The opium trade came under fire. Nations woke up to the devastation. China demanded justice. Activists in Britain called the trade immoral. Governments passed restrictions. Public opinion turned poisonous. The Sassoons knew what was coming, the end of the opium era. So they shifted. Just like modern billionaires today, when one empire ends, another begins. They moved into banking, into oil, into textiles, into infrastructure, into Western finance and politics. They closed one door and opened 10 more. A true dynasty doesn't die, it evolves. World War I arrived, then World War II, and like many powerful families, the Sassoons played a quiet role, supporting war efforts, investing in defense industries, maintaining ties with governments. While nations burned, banking dynasties profited. It has always been that way. But war also changed the world order. The British Empire weakened. India moved toward independence. China collapsed into revolution. Trade networks shifted, and slowly, the once invincible Sassoon Empire began to fade from headlines. Not because they lost everything, but because they entered the final and most powerful stage of influence: silence. The kind of silence that only old money understands. Not loud like new billionaires, not public like politicians, but quiet, insulated, eternal. Today, the Sassoon name barely makes the news. Their palaces stand. Their legacy remains in business districts, libraries, bank foundations, universities. But their story is strangely missing from mainstream history. Why? Maybe because their rise exposes how empires truly work. Maybe because their wealth came from a trade no nation wants to remember. Or maybe because power prefers shadows over spotlight. We celebrate inventors. We remember scientists. We honor generals. But those who control the flow of money, they write history and erase themselves from it when necessary. The Sassoon dynasty didn't disappear. It simply dissolved into the bloodstream of global finance. You don't always see power. Sometimes you feel its fingerprints on history. They began as merchants. They became empire builders. They influenced wars, politics, and entire continents. And yet, their greatest achievement wasn't wealth or titles. It was learning the ultimate rule of power. True dominance is not being seen. It's being remembered only by those who understand. In the end, the Sassoons didn't just make money. They shaped the world, quietly, strategically, and forever. If you want more hidden history, forbidden finance stories, and secret empires exposed, subscribe to Pastify. And if this episode opened your eyes, hit like, so more people can learn the truth they were never meant to know. Pastify, uncovering the history they tried to erase.